Hello, everyone. I am Rachel Telfor.
And I'm Michelle Gower.
We are the hosts of a new true crime podcast.
It is called Children of the Void.
The Void refers to children who are missing
and children who have died under mysterious and suspicious circumstances.
Sometimes parents know nothing about what has happened to their child.
And sometimes they seem to know more than they let on.
Like Casey Anthony.
And the John Benet Ramsey case.
We are determined to do our part to find missing children.
And the truth when the story of their disappearance doesn't hold up.
Together, we will blast the shadows with light so that no more children disappear into the void.
Children of the Void debuts in September.
Join us so we can all make a difference.
Please subscribe.
Until then, I'm Rachel Telfor.
And I'm Michelle Gower.
You can catch Children of the Void on Apple, Spotify, YouTube,
and everywhere else you get your podcasts.
Hey y'all, Morgan Rector here. Do you have an idea for a podcast? Furthermore, would you like to host and co-produce your own podcast? I am always looking to expand the portfolio of my company, Leader One Podcast Network. If you would like to have your own show, send me an email and we can talk about it. Aside from politics and religion, I'm open to just about any topic. If you are passionate, knowledgeable, and articulate, I want to talk to you. You can contact me by email, morgansvariety@gmail.com. I hope to hear from you soon. Hey, Morgan Rector here. I'm just dropping a line to say thank you to all of my Patreon donors. Since I'm not a Joe Rogan or Mark Maron, podcasting is more or less a starving artist gig for guys like me. Patreon donations keep me from having to take a job that would take away from my ability to generate more Human Monsters content. The website URL for Patreon is www.patreon, that's spelled patreon.com/leader ONE, Leader One. A way to make a one-time donation is to send it through PayPal at morganrector331, Rector spelled RECTOR, at hotmail.com, morganrector331 at hotmail.com. You don't have to give a large amount of money if it isn't possible. If $1 a month or $1 one time is the best you can pony up, it would be gratefully accepted. I know how hard things are for everybody during COVID. Thank you for all the support you have given the show, whether it is through financial donations or simply by listening. I am grateful for all you have given to me and the program. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Human Monsters. John Wayne Gacy is a human monster first class, notable among the most notorious serial killers in the history of American crime. Though his story has received coverage over the years, rivaling that of such prominent figures like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, it is always a tale worth telling. If it were to be forgotten, his victims would be forgotten by everybody except their families. To forget John Wayne Gacy would be to forget what his victims suffered through, and we, as a society, cannot afford to be so callous. Birth of a Monster. The so-called killer clown, John Wayne Gacy, was neither born with makeup on his face or blood on his hands. His presence befouled the earth starting on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. He was the second child and only son of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robison. His father was an auto repair machinist and a veteran of World War I. His mother was a homemaker. John Sr. was an abusive alcoholic. He regularly tortured his family with physical abuse. His son was passive and struggled to cope with the beatings. The damage inflicted on him by his father was long-lasting, with no remedy in sight. John Jr. also endured emotional abuse from his father. His father would regularly call him dumb and stupid. He would compare him to his sisters, shedding a light on those attributes he felt validated his feeling that the boy was inferior to his siblings. One of John Jr.'s earliest memories were of his father lashing him with a leather belt for inadvertently rearranging components of a car he had assembled. Junior's mother would often intervene to shield him from his father's wrath. This only consolidated his father's perception of Junior as weak. He would often insult him based on this criteria, calling him a sissy and a mama's boy. He speculated that Junior would become a homosexual. That one observation was found to be accurate. Junior loved his father, but he never shook the feeling that he was never good enough for him. In 1949, Junior and a friend were caught fondling a little girl. When this matter was brought to John Sr.'s attention, he whipped Junior with a razor strop. It was during the same year when another pivotal development in Junior's sexual evolution transpired. A family friend occasionally molested him in his truck. Junior never told his father about it for fear that he would be blamed. As a child, John Jr. was not athletically inclined and became overweight. He had a heart condition and was advised by physicians to avoid strenuous activity. More health problems emerged. In the 4th grade, he began having blackouts, which often required hospitalization. His appendix burst in 1957. Gacy would later speculate that between the ages of 14 and 18, his combined days in convalescence spent in hospital amounted to about a year. His grade point average in school went on a decline, which he attributed to all the time he spent recuperating from his myriad health problems. His father accused him of faking his illnesses to get sympathy and attention. Nobody else shared his appraisal of the situation. Junior's medical issues defied diagnosis, likely reinforcing his father's view that his son was being manipulative. Sometimes his father would beat or ridicule him unprovoked. It often happened when his father was drunk. Early adulthood. In 1960, at the age of 18, John Wayne Gacy immersed himself in politics. He worked as an assistant precinct captain for the Democratic candidate in his neighborhood. As always, his father saw little of value in anything Junior did. His involvement with the Democrats led him to label his son a patsy. Years later, Gacy said that his participation in the machinations of politics was an endeavor to seek the approval and acceptance from others that his father denied to him all his life. His father bought him a car that year, though reimbursement was in order. His father kept the car's title in his name until John compensated him in full. It took several years. Maintaining control over his son well into his adulthood, John Sr. would confiscate the keys to the car if Junior did not comply with his wishes. Junior remedied the situation by having a second set of keys cut. When his father discovered this, he removed the distributor cap, withholding it for 3 days. Gacy noted years later that this left him feeling, quote-unquote, totally sick and, quote, drained. Las Vegas. Desperate to break free from his father's draconian rule, Gacy left his family's home and drove to Las Vegas hours after his father returned the distributor cap to his custody. He was hired to work with the ambulance service. If fate itself were personified as an imp with a morbid sense of humor, he was in rare form when Gacy was reassigned to work as an attendant at Palm Mortuary. During this time as a mortuary attendant, Gacy slept on a cot in the embalming room. He worked in this capacity for 3 months. He observed as morticians embalmed dead bodies. Decades later, Gacy admitted that one evening, while he was alone in the facility, he got inside a coffin that contained the remains of a teenage male. He embraced and caressed the boy's cadaver until he went into a state of shock. He was beside himself. He was appalled by what he was doing. The following day, he called his mother and asked her if his father would let him move back into their home. His father consented, and Junior drove back to Chicago. Springfield. Having resettled in Illinois, Gacy enrolled at Northwestern Business College. This, despite being a high school dropout. He did graduate from Northwestern in 1963, and he accepted a management trainee position with the Nunn Bush Shoe Company. They transferred him to Springfield in 1964. There he worked first as a salesman. He was eventually promoted to the position of department manager. He was dating a woman named Marilyn Myers, one of his co-workers. They became engaged in March. During their courtship, Gacy joined the United States Junior Chamber, colloquially known as the JCs. It is a leadership training and civic organization for individuals between the ages of 18 and 40. His devotion to the local chapter was inexhaustible. He was named Key Man in April, a lofty position within the conglomerate's leadership hierarchy. 1964 was also significant in the life of John Wayne Gacy in the sense that he had his second homosexual experience. As Gacy told it, one of his colleagues in the Springfield JCs plied him with alcoholic beverages and offered to let him crash on his sofa. Gacy accepted his invitation, which eventually led to his colleague performing fellatio on him while he was still inebriated. By 1965, Gacy was promoted to the highest echelons of the Springfield JCs. He was now vice president. Before the end of the year, he was named the third most outstanding JC in the state of Illinois. Waterloo, Iowa. September 1964. After 6 months of courting, John and Marilyn were married. Shortly thereafter, Marilyn's father became a franchisee of Kentucky Fried Chicken by purchasing 3 of the chain's restaurants. After John completed a requisite corporate management course, Gacy and his wife moved to Waterloo so that they would be more conveniently located. John was to manage all 3 restaurants. He and Marilyn moved into a house that had formerly belonged to her parents. Gacy's salary was $15,000, or the equivalent of $123,921. He also received a share of the profits from all 3 locations. Life was good for John Wayne Gacy. To liven up his social life, he opened up a so-called club in the basement of his house. The idea was that his employees could drink alcohol and play billiards there. Many of his employees were teenagers, so they were keen to take him up on his invitations. Both males and females worked at the restaurants, but Gacy only socialized with the boys. He would ply them with alcohol, whereupon he would make sexual advances. If they rebuffed him, he would claim that he was either joking or assessing the pliability of their moral fabric. February 1966. The Gacy's son was born. March 1967. Gacy and Marilyn had a daughter. Gacy had never been so happy. He described this period of his life as perfect, a golden age as noted within the annals of his personal history. He even earned his father's approval, a feat once considered nearly impossible. In fact, when John's parents visited in July of 1966, his father took John aside in a private space and apologized for the abuse to which he subjected him throughout his childhood and adolescence. He said, "Son, I was wrong about you." He shook his hand. It was the closest he would come to telling him he loved him, and it was gratefully accepted. The Waterloo JCs. Gacy joined the local chapter of the JCs in Waterloo. He worked overtime for the organization, somehow piling it on top of his schedule, which already consisted of working 12 to 14-hour days at the restaurants. When Gacy attended JC meetings, he would cater the affair with fried chicken. He insisted that everybody call him Colonel. Gacy and a few other members engaged in activities beyond the margins of the chapter that were far less wholesome than outsiders would have suspected. Such tawdry endeavors as wife swapping, prostitution, and pornography became the frequent subject matter of code language and whispers. Use of narcotics was not unheard of in those circles. The common perception of Gacy within the Waterloo chapter was that he was highly ambitious. He was also noted for his arrogance. However, he was held in high esteem by the membership for his tireless efforts in the area of fundraising. His efforts in this area were rewarded in 1967 when he was named Outstanding Vice President. He joined the board of directors that same year. PDM contractors. Gacy and his wife divorced, and he no longer managed the KFC outlets. He was on probation after a stint in prison for a charge of sodomy. He started a part-time construction business. The PDM of PDM contractors stood for painting, decorating, and maintenance. Gacy worked at this business during the evenings and worked as a cook during the day. Clown. Gacy joined the local Moose Club. An adjunct to the organization was a quote-unquote Jolly Joker clown club. They would perform at fundraising events and parades, as well as entertaining children in hospitals. Gacy created 2 clown personas, Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown. He seldom earned money from this pursuit, but it didn't bother him. He enjoyed the opportunity to regress back to a childlike state and to bring joy to others. It was all downhill from there. Robert Donnelly. State's Attorney Terry Sullivan interviewed one Robert Donnelly. Donnelly gave Sullivan a thumbnail idea of what happened to victims who weren't lucky enough to escape from Gacy's clutches alive. On December 30th, 1977, Donnelly left a friend's house in the northwest side of Chicago. A dark-colored car pulled up with one spotlight on Robert. The driver posed as an undercover cop. He asked Donnelly for ID. While Donnelly was poised against the passenger door to display his ID, the man in the car said, Get in or I'll blow you away. Donnelly saw the letters PDM and assumed Gacy was a legitimate police officer. He cooperated with Gacy. Gacy said, "Lean forward. I want to put cuffs on." Donnelly said, "What's going on?" Gacy said, "Shut up. If you're smart, you'll keep quiet." Every time Donnelly spoke, Gacy told him to shut up. When they reached the Kennedy Expressway, Gacy stopped the car. He yelled at Donnelly, saying, "Get down on the floor." Once they arrived at Gacy's house, John led Robert in by the handcuffs. Once inside, he pushed him down on a couch in the rec room. Gacy still held the gun. He left the room and came back dressed in something more casual. He poured himself a drink. Gacy said, "I'm 35 years old, but people don't respect me." Gacy had 2 or 3 more drinks. He offered one to Donnelly. Robert declined. Gacy said, "Have it anyway." He thrust the drink in his face, splashing him with it. Gacy went into a misogynistic riff. Women are hung up on looks, and that's all. He offered Donnelly another drink, and once again the boy refused. He said, "Drink it anyway, you ungrateful little bastard." He grabbed Donnelly by the neck and poured the liquor down his throat. Gacy said, "When somebody offers you something, you should take it." Gacy retrieved his gun. He walked back over to Donnelly and uncuffed him. He said, "I don't want to shoot, but I will if I have to. This house is soundproof." From there, Gacy ordered Donnelly to toss his identification cards and sit on a chair. Donnelly handed Gacy his wallet. Gacy rummaged through his wallet while pointing the gun at him. He asked him relevant questions every time he read one of the ID cards. He told Donnelly to sit at the bar. Gacy poured himself another drink. He slid the handcuffs along the bar. He said, "Put these on yourself." Robert said, "What if somebody comes?" John slapped him with the back of his hand. He said to Robert, "I told you people don't respect me. You don't either. I ought to kill you now." John pushed Robert onto the couch. He sat on his back. He pulled his head up by his hair. Donnelly screamed. Gacy shouted, "Shut up!" He slammed Robert's head down. Gacy pulled down Robert's pants. He forced his knees apart and raped him. Robert struggled. A few moments later, the stress was too overwhelming, and he passed out. Donnelly woke when Gacy was finished with him. He pinned Robert down by his shoulders. He said, "If you fight me now, I'll kill you." Gacy stood. He told Robert to pull his pants up. He grabbed him by the cuffs and yanked him toward the bathroom. The tub had been filled with water. Gacy slammed Robert's face into the wall. He wrapped a rope around his neck and twisted it. Gacy said, "This is a lot of fun, huh?" Gacy alternated between twisting the rope and banging Robert's head into the wall. Gacy asked him, "How does this feel?" Gacy tripped Robert, which sent the boy falling to the floor. He pulled him up to his knees. He shoved Robert's head into the water while holding on to the rope. Robert held his breath for as long as he could, but he passed out. When Robert woke, he was on the floor. He was naked. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He looked up and saw that Gacy was standing in the doorway. He said to Robert, "We're having fun tonight, huh?" Gacy dunked Robert's head underwater again. Donnelly passed out again. Robert woke up later to the visage of Gacy sitting on the toilet. Gacy was laughing. He said, "Looking for me?" Gacy got up and stood over Robert. he urinated on him. Having finished pissing on his victim, Gacy retrieved a copy of Penthouse magazine. He showed Donnelly some pictures. Gacy said, "Like this?" By this point, Robert was too weak and lightheaded to converse with him. Gacy kicked him in the ribs. He pushed his head underwater again. Once more, Robert passed out. When Donnelly woke, Gacy dragged him into a bedroom. He tripped him. Gacy sat on Donnelly's back. He said, "You're just in time for the late movie." Gacy pulled Donnelly's hair and lifted his head up. He said, "Look at this." A film was being projected on the wall. It was homosexual pornography. With the film having completely unspooled, Gacy pondered the possibility of what they could do next. He ordered Robert to sit up against the wall. Gacy got a chair and gun. He sat facing Robert. He planted one foot on his stomach. Gacy said, "We'll play Russian roulette." Gacy spun the chamber of his gun. He pointed the barrel at Robert's head. He pulled the trigger. Click. He spun the chamber once more. He pulled the trigger. Another click. Gacy claimed to have murdered girls at Schiller Park. He said, "Girls are no fun to kill. Guys are more interesting to kill." Bam! Ha ha! You're dead. Gacy grabbed Robert by the throat and choked him. For the 5th time that night, Donnelly passed out. When Donnelly woke, he was still handcuffed and stark naked. He now had a gag in his mouth that was tied around his head. Gacy was naked now. He fondled Robert. He ordered him to roll over. Donnelly refused. Gacy said, "Do what I say." Gacy punched Robert. He rolled him over forcibly. Gacy raped him with a large dildo. It was so painful, Robert fainted for the 6th time. Robert woke to the sound of Gacy saying, "Isn't it fun screaming when nobody can hear you?" The dildo was still lodged in Donnelly's rectum, and Gacy was playing with it. Robert was wincing and groaning from the pain. Gacy removed the gag. He warned him not to scream. Suddenly death seemed more appealing than the tortures to which Gacy was subjecting him. He said, "Why don't you just kill me and get it over with?" Gacy said, "I'm getting around to it." Robert screamed. Gacy put the gag back on his mouth. He told Robert he looked bad. He pushed him into the bathroom. He watched Robert as he showered. When Robert got dressed, Gacy told him they were going for a ride. He struck him. He said to Robert, "I'm going to kill you." Gacy ushered Donnelly outside, handcuffed, to his car. It was during the day. Gacy said, "Don't wake up the neighbors." Once they were inside the car, Gacy ordered Robert to get down on the floor. He followed up by saying, "How does it feel knowing you're going to die?" Gacy drove them to the Marshall Fields store. Robert worked there. John removed the handcuffs. He said, "I'm going to let you go. But if you go to the cops, I'll hunt you down." When Donnelly got out of the car, he was in a daze. Before driving off, Gacy said to him, "The cops won't believe you anyway." Robert Donnelly reported the attack to police. They took him to hospital for treatment. January 6, 1978. John Wayne Gacy was arrested at his house on suspicion for deviant sexual conduct. He wasn't rattled at all. He even offered a beverage to one of the investigators as he waited for a backup squad car to arrive. The officer declined. When questioned about the incident, Gacy contradicted Robert's account, insisting that all that transpired between them was consensual. An assistant state's attorney reviewed the case, interviewing both Donnelly and Gacy. The attorney rejected calls for felony charges. Just as Gacy predicted, they didn't believe Donnelly. Rob Piest. December 11th, 1978, Des Plaines, Illinois. 15-year-old Rob Piest worked at Nissan Pharmacy. At the end of his shift, his parents would pick him up so he could join them in celebrating his mother's birthday. In the meantime, Rob was stocking shelves. The owner of the pharmacy, Phil Torf, had hired a company called PE Systems to remodel the facility. Among the firm's personnel was a supervisor named John Gacy. Though Gacy's knowledge of and craftsmanship in the area of carpentry was limited, Gacy possessed an impressive amount of knowledge about pharmaceutical marketing. He was also a high-powered motivator, whose crew always honored deadlines. The remodeling was done while the pharmacy was closed, so as to avoid disturbing the store's customers. Gacy and Torf had gotten better acquainted and became fast friends. Gacy explained that his new contracting business was called PDM, which stood for Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance. He would supplement his income where possible with snow removal and selling Christmas trees. At one point, Gacy said to Dorf, "Looks like you've got pretty much of a new crew here." He inspected the team, and his eyes settled on Rob Piest. Phil said, "They're high school kids. They go on to college or other jobs. There's always a turnover." 8:58 p.m. Rob Piest walked up to his friend and coworker Kim and asked her to watch the cash register. He could call his mother. He said to her, "Some contractor wants to talk to me about a job." He grabbed his parka and left the store. A few minutes later, Phil Torf approached Kim and asked her where Rob had gone off to. She said, "He's outside talking to the guy who was in here. Don't worry, he's a big boy." A few minutes later, Elizabeth Piest, Rob's mother, asked Kim if Rob had returned to the store. He hadn't. This vague but undeniable feeling swept Mrs. Piest. She felt an urgent feeling to rush to Rob's side. She couldn't explain it. She made some small talk with Kim for a few minutes, but this did nothing to allay the anxiety that mounted within her. She left, asking Kim to tell Rob to call her at home when he returned. Elizabeth said she would return. It was now 9:20. Moments later, Phil walked up to the register. Kim said to him, "Who is that construction guy?" Phil said, "You mean John Gacy? He's all right. He's a good guy." The Piest family were puzzled that at 9:25 p.m. there was still no sign of Rob. Elizabeth called Nissens again and spoke to Kim. Rob had still not turned up. Kim said he went off with some kind of contractor to see about a job. Elizabeth said, "Do you have any idea who Rob was going to talk to?" Kim said the man's name was John Gacy. This was strange behavior for Rob. Despite his youth, he was a reliable and responsible sort who never disappeared without filling anybody in on the details. His family was worried. Knowing nothing of his whereabouts and imagining the worst, they considered many options of where he might have gone and what state he was in now following his arrival. Phil Torf spoke with Elizabeth Piest on the phone. He said, "I'll call John and see if he knows anything about Rob." She asked for Gacy's address and phone number. Torf had his number but not his address. She said, Why would he want to be talking with a 15-year-old boy at this time of night? Torf said, "Hey, wait a minute. This guy's no bum." With that, Elizabeth hung up. Her husband, Harold, called Gacy's number. The call was picked up by an answering machine. After he hung up, he said, "We're going to the police." At the police station, Robert's family was informed by an officer that all they could do at that point was submit a missing persons report. They gave the police everything they knew up to that point. Rob's vital statistics were given. Anyone who cared to get involved in the search would know the following about Rob Piest. Name, Robert Jerome Piest. Sex, male. Race, Caucasian. Age, 15. Apparel, tan Levi pants, t-shirt, brown wedge-type suede shoes, and light blue down jacket. At 1:54 a.m., a dispatcher sent the report to all police jurisdictions in Illinois. Meanwhile, the Piest family were frantic. They organized their own search of Desplaines. Elizabeth stayed at home near the telephone. The police contacted the telephone company. They were told that there was a number for PDM Contractors Corporation, but none for John Gacy. An address connected to PDM was found. Detective James Pickle knocked on the door, but nobody answered. He spoke with a neighbor and asked her if she had any idea where Gacy was. She didn't. The search was fruitless. The next day, Rob Piest's family went through the motions of living a normal life, but they forced themselves through it. They were all able-bodied, but they could only walk the walk of stoicism on crutches. The police went into overdrive in their search for information about John Gacy. They contacted other police departments. A downtown precinct of the Chicago PD told them that Gacy had a parole record. Pickle asked, "What was the parole for?" The officer said, "Sodomy, Waterloo, Iowa, May 20th, 1968. 10 years, Iowa Men's Reformatory, Anamosa." Gacy had also been charged with battery, aggravated battery, and reckless conduct. John Gacy's record provided a glimpse into his potential for physical and sexual violence. Lieutenant Joseph Kozenczak said to an assistant state's attorney, "We don't know what we have, but we're going to talk to this guy and want to know how far we can push him." When Kozenczak returned to the station, he found that Pickle had obtained John Gacy's arrest records. A 24-year-old man named Jackie D. reported to the police that he was offered a ride on June 7th, 1972 at 3:40 a.m. by a man who called himself John. When D. realized that John wasn't driving him to his requested destination, he raised objections. John pulled out a badge and identified as a, quote, county police officer, end quote. He informed D he was being arrested. He tried to handcuff D, but without success. He asked D what it was worth to get out of the situation. D said he had no money on him. John said, "Would you suck my dick?" D feared for his safety. He agreed to this condition. When they arrived at a Barnaby's restaurant in the town of Northbrook, John pulled keys out of his pocket and unlocked the door to the building. Once they were inside, D thought better of it and withdrew his cooperation. John clubbed him on the back of his neck. He kicked him as he lay on the floor. D got up and ran outside. John got in his truck and caught up with D. He ran him over. D managed to recover. He ran to a gas station where an attendant called the police for him. The night manager of the restaurant, John Gacy, was interviewed by police the following day. Gacy said he was aware that he was implicated in the assault. He was grateful to have the opportunity to exonerate himself. He said, "I was home at 3 a.m. My wife will verify that." The process of confirming the identity of Gacy in the crime took 2 weeks. Jackie D. first said that he was unable to participate because of his injuries. Soon after, Gacy was transferred by his employer and eventually separated from them altogether. He was arrested on June 22nd. The charges were dismissed after Gacy informed the police that D was making threatening phone calls in an attempt to extort money in exchange for dropping the charges. A setup drop was organized by police. Police searched D and found $91 in marked currency that was given to him by Gacy. The records of both men were examined. Gacy with his sodomy charge and D with his charges of robbery, solicitation for prostitution, and disorderly conduct. The police left them at the location, and the matter was not pursued again. Gacy was questioned about the disappearance of Robert Piest. He was cooperative and solicitous. He strenuously denied having any knowledge or involvement. Joseph Kozenzak was intent on obtaining a search warrant for John Wayne Gacy's house. At this time, Rob Piest's parents had become impatient with the police. They became convinced that Rob was not only abducted by Gacy, but that he was keeping him prisoner in his house. Harold Piest stated his intention to break Gacy's door down and search the house so he could rescue his son. Legal consequences be damned. Authorities in Waterloo revealed some damning details about John Wayne Gacy from his criminal history after they did some extensive digging. During the time when Gacy was managing Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants, he became intimately involved with some of his male employees. He would bind and handcuff them. He had sex with one of the boys. They were all teenagers. Gacy was brought in for questioning. Pickle asked him about his business affairs. Gacy said he had been involved in contracting for 10 years and had worked in several states. His firm specialized in drugstore and shopping center jobs. He said before that he had worked as a cook. He had also been a lighting commissioner in Norwich. He mentioned his involvement with the Democratic Party in Chicago. He showed Pickle a card that indicated he was a precinct captain in Norwood Park Township. He put together a Polish Constitution Day parade in Chicago and would soon go to Washington to supervise the national equivalent. He was twice divorced and currently single. He was not being detained, and after a non-constructive conversation between his lawyer and one of the officers, he left. A search warrant for Gacy's home was issued. State's Attorney Terry Sullivan approached Gacy. He said, "I'm a state's attorney, and I'd like the keys to your house." Gacy, "What for?" Sullivan, "I have a search warrant." Sullivan showed Gacy the warrant. Gacy, "Well, I'm not going to give them to you." Sullivan, "Mr. Gacy, we're trying to be nice to you. You have a choice. Either you give the police officers the keys, and they'll go into your house peaceably, or they'll have to break down the door. What do you want to do?" Gacy stonewalled him. Sullivan turned and walked away. Gacy said under his breath, "Big asshole." Sullivan said to Kozenzak, "Go take the keys." Gacy had already given Pickle the keys. He said, "Don't get the place all messed up." Items of interest found in John Wayne Gacy's house. A jewelry box containing many trinkets and items of assorted jewelry. One of them was a Maine West High School class ring, inscribed in 1975. Initials engraved in the ring, JAS. At the bottom of the jewelry box, was an Illinois driver's license issued to one Patrick J. Riley. 7 Swedish erotic films. A cigarette box containing dried plant material suspected of being marijuana with some rolling papers. A stock of prescription medications. A switchblade knife. 2 sex books. A bag of starter pistol blanks. A temporary Illinois driver's license issued to one Matthew F. Cooper. A large brown envelope containing 8 or more sex books. A pair of handcuffs with keys. A 2x4 with 2 holes drilled into each end. Color photos of John Gacy in various stages of clown makeup. An Italian starter pistol. The officers took a look at the pull-down stairway leading to the attic. There were some fresh splotches of spray paint on it, consistent with a red primer on a few of the treads. In the attic, under insulation, were police badges and an 18-inch rubber dildo. Some items from other sections of the house. A hypodermic syringe. A small brown bottle. Various items of clothing that were far too small for Gacy to wear. Books with titles such as Tight Teenagers, Heads and Tails, Pederasty, Sex Between Men and Boys, The Rights of Gay People, The Great White Swallow, 21 Abnormal Sex Cases. Close to the bathroom door in the hallway, a section of carpeting was cut out. It was stained with what appeared to be blood. In the kitchen, a reddish-orange ticket was sticking out of a bag of garbage on the floor. It was a customer photo receipt issued by Nissen Pharmacy. It was entered into evidence. While the search was underway, a young man came to the house. He said he worked for Gacy and was returning his truck. He spoke with one of the officers. Detective Mike Olson motioned toward an open trapdoor in a closet. He said, "It smells really bad down there, just like sewage." The boy said, "Yeah, John's been having trouble with seepage and stuff." Detective Raphael Tovar and evidence technician Carl Humbert entered, announcing they were going to delve into Gacy's crawl space. All they found on face value was flat dirt. Meanwhile, Gacy sat in a room with detectives at the police station. They informed him that his car and pickup truck had been seized for evidence gathering. Gacy said, "Okay, you've played your game. How am I going to get home? Why am I being treated this way?" Gacy was moved to an interview room. He complained of having a heart condition and how the cold temperature of the room would be problematic. He was shown a Miranda waiver to confirm he had been advised of his legal rights as a detainee. He said, "I'm not signing anything until I talk to my lawyer." Gacy's lawyer advised his client not to sign the Miranda. Investigator Greg Beto said to him, "Fine. If you don't mind, counselor, I'm just going to note on the margin that Mr. Gacy refused to sign this Miranda, per your advice." Gacy was asked questions relevant to the disappearance of Rob Piest. As usual, he divulged nothing that could have incriminated him. After all available evidence was examined, Terry Sullivan informed Joseph Kazanczak that he wanted Gacy placed under 24-hour surveillance. The Piest family turned up at the station. They were so exhausted from losing sleep over Rob's disappearance, they were the ghosts of their formerly vibrant selves. Kevin Sullivan didn't want to mislead them. He said, "Don't get your hopes up too high. The chances of your son being found alive are very slim." By then they had already given up hope. Sullivan urged them to refrain from discussing the case with the media. After interviewing friends and work associates of Rob Piest, police concluded that he couldn't have run away. Their combined sources all told them it would be totally out of character. One day, Kozenczak dispatched Raphael Tovar and Sergeant Jim Ryan to the home of Gacy's employee, Richard Walsh. They wanted to bring him in for questioning. He wasn't home, but his wife was. She allowed them to wait inside. She asked them if their inquiry was related to John Gacy. They confirmed that it was. Mrs. Walsh had some interesting data to report. She said Gacy was constantly trying to persuade Richard to leave her. Gacy would often call her, telling her that when Richard said he was working late, he was really having relations with another woman. She was asked if she had ever been to Gacy's house. She said that Richard was living there when they first began dating. She noted that Gacy had some odd items among his belongings in the house. Tovar said, "Like what?" Mrs. Walsh, "A board with chains attached to it." Tovar, "Can you describe it?" Mrs. Walsh, "It was like a 2x4, about that long." She pointed to a carpenter's level that leaned against the wall. She mentioned that Richard was arrested in Cicero for assaulting Gacy. He was still under court supervision for the charge. Tovar asked her if Gacy ever made a pass at Richard. She said she didn't know. She did say she heard once that when someone sent a friend to Gacy's house to buy Valium, he propositioned them. She indicated that she occasionally saw Gacy in the company of a woman. After leaving, the officers were on their way to their cruiser when Richard Walsh pulled up. He agreed to accompany them to the station and be questioned. On the way, he mentioned a recent interaction with Gacy. He said he was agitated about something. He mentioned going to a bank and withdrawing $4,000, saying he might need it for bond. He asked Walsh not to, quote, badmouth him, unquote, should he be questioned by police. During questioning, the subject of sex came up. When Walsh began working for Gacy, he was asked about his sexual orientation. Gacy described his as quite liberal. Walsh told Gacy he was straight, and that if sexual favors were expected of him to retain his position, he could not be relied upon for his compliance. Gacy dropped the subject. Walsh was questioned by Kozenczak, but there was nothing more to report. One promising lead emerged. 4 young men who had been associated with John Wayne Gacy had been reported missing or dead. Their names were John Bokovich, Gregory Godzik, Charles Itulo, and John Civic. Gacy, accompanied by 2 of his workers, was pulled over by police because of his reckless driving. His companions threatened the arresting officers with violence. They were cuffed and taken to the police station. Gacy said, "Why are you doing this to me?" Officer Ron Robinson said, "The boss gives us a job to do, and since he doesn't give us an explanation, I don't have one to give you." Chris Gray once worked for John Gacy's contracting business. One day after Gacy admonished him for his chronic tardiness, he gave him a watch. Gray said, "Thanks a lot. Where'd you get this from?" Gacy said, "From a dead person." Police interviewed Gacy's ex-wife, Kathy Graywitz. She noted that 6 months into their marriage, Gacy started bringing young men to the garage at night. It wasn't uncommon for them to remain in the garage for hours. Once, when she went into the garage after John spent some time alone in there with a boy, she saw a mattress on the floor. The space was illuminated with a red light. When she asked Gacy what transpired between him and the boys in the garage, he would become angry and defensive. He would refuse to answer the question. He told her at one point that he was bisexual. She was skeptical, feeling it was more likely that he was gay. Less than 2 years into their marriage, Gacy announced to Kathy on Mother's Day that their sexual encounter on that day would be their last. She said she often found her bikini panties in the garage. She was also privy to Gacy's compulsive masturbation. He masturbated furiously, strenuously, frequently, obsessively. His sexual encounters with his wife never elicited the same kind of climax as his autoerotic stimulation. Following the death of their sex life, relations between the two spouses were poor, often resulting in heated arguments. On one occasion, it turned violent when he threw a candlestick at her. He threatened to hit her, but his sister restrained him. There were other incidents when he threw furniture around the house during one of his rages. Sometimes his anger was provoked by trivial issues. During the last 4 months of the marriage, Gacy sequestered himself behind a sliding door behind the house. Kathy and John did not speak at all by this juncture. John brought Richard Walsh into the house before the divorce proceedings were set in motion. To quote Kathy, "The minute I was gone, he was there." After the divorce, John and Kathy reconciled somewhat. One night they met up at a tavern where he filled her in on the true nature of his sexuality. He said, "I feel myself slipping the other way, and I can't do anything about it." He told her his favorite type of male was young and blonde, with a specific shape of buttocks. John and Kathy tried to salvage their sex life. Nothing she did could arouse him. He cried, saying, "I'm sorry. I thought I had a chance, but I don't." She said, "You should go for help." He said, "No, it's too late for that." She wanted to remedy the situation, but there really was nothing she could do. She had 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and Gacy had been a positive paternal figure in their lives. She regretted that they would lose that connection. She mentioned his affiliation with the local precinct of the Democratic Party. He wanted to be promoted to precinct captain, but he feared that his criminal record would come back to haunt him, especially the charge for prostitution. He was nevertheless deeply involved with the local political brass, and she felt he used its influence as leverage to buy his way out of trouble. Kathy described an incident whose implications were far more ominous in terms of shedding light on Gacy's potential for violence. Gacy had gone on a trip to Florida with a young man named Jack Peisler. Shortly after they returned to Chicago, Peisler paid a visit to Gacy, and it didn't end well. Peisler attacked John as retaliation for raping him in Florida. One day, Gacy treated the officers who observed him during surveillance to dinner. He discussed his supplemental gig as a clown, entertaining both adults and children. At one point, he noted that because everything a clown does is assumed to be facetious and benign in intention, they can boldly do things they wouldn't dare do without the shell of makeup and big floppy shoes. Sometimes it even involved sexually harassing women. He said he could go up to a woman and squeeze her damn tits, and she would laugh it off. Sure, it was one sick joke, and it wouldn't have been taken so lightly in the Me Too era, but this was the 20th century. It was decades before Bill Clinton's infamous blowjob, and people often did laugh off these things. As Gacy said to the cops, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." The police brought a canine unit in to inspect Casey's vehicles. One dog in particular was trained to smell residual olfactory traces of a cadaver. When she entered Gacy's Oldsmobile, she stopped and lay down on the passenger seat. Her handler reported that this signal is known as a, quote, death reaction. What's more, the police now knew that this car that belonged to John Wayne Gacy had been used to ferry the corpse of Robert Piest to its as yet unknown destination. A lab assistant at the crime laboratory of the Department of Law Enforcement confirmed that the brown bottle found at John Wayne Gacy's house had at one time contained chloroform. Police asked Richard Walsh if he had ever been in Gacy's crawl space. He said he went down there with Gacy in summer of 1977 to spread 10 bags of lime. A putrid stench permeated the atmosphere of the house. Gacy's explanation was that the sump pump was malfunctioning. At one point, Walsh's mother was brought into the room. She demanded to know if he was under arrest and what he was being questioned about. She was not keen on Gacy at all. She was concerned that he was threatening Richard. She informed the investigators that it wouldn't be the first time. She explained that the previous summer, Richard told Gacy that if he didn't get a raise, he would report him to the Carpenters Union. Gacy warned him that if he informed on him, his entire family would suffer the consequences. Richard told his mother about the incident. She went to Gacy's house accompanied by a male friend. He stuck a gun in Gacy's mouth. Mrs. Walsh said to Gacy, "If anything happens to my son or his family, you are dead." One night in Gacy's house, police smelled a foul odor. They smelled it the previous night, which Gacy blamed on his dog relieving himself on the kitchen floor. This time around, the dog had not soiled the floor, but the same effluvium lingered. It was an affront to weak stomachs, and from the point of view of any detective worth their salt, it was worth investigating. At some crime scenes, the nose will find what the eyes cannot see. Experience in the field tells a man that tragedy and guilt can be simultaneously embodied in one nauseating funk. They could smell it in the kitchen. They could smell it in the living room. They could smell it in the bathroom. Something was rotten in the state of Illinois. Chris Gray was interviewed. He mentioned a couple of incidents where John Gacy tried to rape him. He always rebuffed him, and Gacy gave up after a couple of attempts. He mentioned some time he spent doing work in the crawl space. The police were very keen to learn more about the crawl space and what one may find down there. This part of the narrative aroused the investigators' suspicions, especially after having smelled the stench that was so pervasive throughout Gacy's house. Gacy was a fastidious housekeeper. Why would he allow something to stink up his house? Greg Beto wanted to know. Beto, what the hell's in the crawl space? Were you ever down there? Gray said he had been down there twice, spreading lime on the first occasion, digging the second. Beto, digging. Why were you digging? Gray told him Gacy said there was too much moisture in the crawl space. He needed to lay pipes down there. Gacy inserted stakes in the soil to indicate where he wanted the digging to be done. Chris Gray and Richard Walsh were dispatched to the crawl space to carry out this task. Beto got Gray to draw a diagram indicating where he was digging. Gray did this, also pointing out where the sump pump was. He reported that they had dug trenches. Gray said that at one point, Gacy stuck his head through the trap door that led to the crawl space. He was displeased with Gray's positioning. He began shouting, saying, "Don't go over there. You go straight where I told you." When the detectives took a look at the drawing, it occurred to them that the locations where Gray dug the trenches were not apropos, since the groundwater would not drain into the sump pump from there. Beto, did Gacy ever lay any pipe? Gray, no. Beto, did you know what Gacy did with the trenches? Gray, no. Beto, what was there when you were digging, when you veered off? Gray, just some dirt piled up. It was a mound about 6 inches high. Beto, how long? Gray, about as long as this. Gray pointed to a desk that was between 5 and 6 feet. He pointed to the diagram and pointed out where he saw mounds that were similar. Beto said to Terry Sullivan, "Jesus, are they in the crawl space?" Pieces of a puzzle were coming together. Gacy's experience in a funeral home. Missing kids. Kids digging for him. Lime. Other investigating officers had suspected that the mounds in the crawl space were graves, but they didn't have a warrant to confirm their suspicions. Officer Bob Schultz was part of the crew who searched Gacy's house. He remembered the foul odor. He had smelled something identical in the Cook County morgue. With evidence that he was in the process of trafficking marijuana and a concern the investigating officers had that he might commit suicide after nearly losing their tail, they cornered Gacy and placed him under arrest. Gacy acted like he was baffled and hurt, as if the very notion that he was anything but an innocent man was patently absurd. He said, "What's the matter? What have I done?" A search warrant to dig into the crawl space was approved. The officers removed the trap door that led to the crawl space. There was a layer of water above the dirt. The sump pump's electrical cord had been disconnected. As the water receded, Schultz shone his flashlight on some kind of matted material that caught his attention. Upon further inspection, it was light brown hair. It was caught on some subflooring. After running the sump pump for 10 minutes, the officers got down into the crawl space. Officer Genty moved to a spot beneath the kitchen. There he saw hair sticking out of the ground. Genty stuck his entrenching tool into the dirt. After digging twice, he saw whitish particles of a soap-like substance emulsifying to the top of the water. This was adipocere flesh, which is body tissue after chemically changing into a substance similar to lard in its consistency. The excavation site smelled like sewage. Genty dug further down, about 6 or 7 inches. He hit something solid. A grating sound resulted. He dug deeper and an object emerged at the surface. It was a bone, most likely from an upper arm. There was still body tissue attached to the bone. It had a pinkish hue. It turned gray after being exposed to the air for a moment. Genty turned to the officers who were watching from above the trap door. He said, "Charge him." The stink in the crawl space was overpowering now. The officers had to put on charcoal-infused odor masks. Genty took up a shovelful of the body parts he found. He walked over to the trap door and stood. The officers asked, "What the hell is that?" Genty said, "It's a body." "How the hell do you know that?" "See the hair sticking out?" One of the officers said, "Better call the medical examiner." Genty said, "I think this crawl space is full of kids." Genty resumed his digging. Now other officers had joined in. Humbert hit something solid with his shovel. He pulled it out of the dirt and discovered that he had unearthed a kneecap. He also found 2 long bones, likely taken from a leg. The bones were black. As Gacy said later, "I should never have been convicted of anything more serious than running a cemetery without a license." Indeed, Gacy had been a crypt keeper, and now it was time for the police to take inventory. The investigators decided to wait until the county medical examiner, Dr. Robert Stein, arrived before disturbing the remains any further. When Stein arrived at the scene, he took a look at the bones and said, "Yeah, it sure looks like a human body." At the station, John Wayne Gacy was brought in after having been taken to the hospital, where he was supposedly recovering from a seizure. Pickle said to him, "Okay, you jagoff, the game is over. You're under arrest for murder. We've found bodies." He was asked by Officer Albrecht how many bodies were in the crawl space. Gacy was finally forthcoming after his history of deception and deflection. He said, "I'm not sure. Is the boy from Nissen's there?" "No, he's not there." He noted that he wasn't sure where he put Piest's body, but with a thorough search he could track down his remains. Dave Hockmeister had lost his patience with Gacy earlier, but he apologized and approached him with a calmer disposition. Gacy said, "That's okay. I understand. Dave, I want to clear the air. I know that the game is over. The lime was used to cover the smell. The bodies have been down there a long time, and there are more bodies off the property." Hockmeister, "But why did you kill them?" Gacy, "I'm bisexual, not homosexual. I never used force. It was always by consent. I never forced anybody because I'm not strong enough to fight, especially with my heart condition. Who else do you have in the station? There are others involved." Albrecht, "Directly or indirectly?" Gacy, "Directly. They participated." The officers asked him for names. Gacy, "My associates." Hockmeister, "You mean Walsh and Gray?" Gacy, "Yeah, Walsh and Gray. Is Gray here now?" Before the officers had a chance to move on to their next question, Gacy came at them with one of his own. "How did you know there were bodies in the crawl space?" Albrecht, "John, we're on surveillance. We don't know what the others are doing. We haven't seen a search warrant." Gacy was known by everybody he ever associated with to be a cocky son of a bitch. Gacy, "Mike, you know I won't be in jail very long. I won't spend a day in jail for this." Albrecht, "Do you want to elaborate on that?" Gacy shrugged. Just then Schultz walked into the room. Schultz, "Well, John, I imagine you have a lot on your mind to unload. Do you still want to speak with us now?" Gacy said he would oblige, but requested to be interviewed in another room because the room in which they were situated was cold. The officers obliged. Once they were settled in the warmer room, Schultz got the ball rolling. Schultz, "John, where is Rob Piest?" Albrecht, "The boy from Nissen's." Gacy, "Oh, I didn't know his name." "No, he's not in the crawl space." Hockmeister, "Where is he?" Gacy, "I don't know. I didn't transport him." Hockmeister, "Who did?" Gacy, "I can't say. But you'll find out when Leroy gets here. He knows. I told my lawyers everything last night." Hockmeister, "You know, John, you don't have to speak with us if you don't want to." Gacy, "I know that." Albrecht, "John, do you recall when your dad died?" Gacy replied to the affirmative. Albrecht, "You weren't able to go to the funeral, were you?" Gacy answered with a shake of his head. Albrecht, "And the prison officials didn't tell you about it until after your dad was buried. Wasn't that around the Christmas holidays?" Gacy nodded. He said it bothered him a great deal. Albrecht, "Well, that's why we want to find Rob Piest's body. For the family." Gacy, "The body is in a location about an hour or hour and a half drive from here, but you'll never find it." Albrecht, "Well, if you'll just tell me where it's at, and if I can't find it, I will tell you, John, that I can't find it, and you were right." Hockmeister, "Is the body above ground or is it buried?" Gacy, "Above ground." Hockmeister, "How did he die?" Gacy, "They were all strangled. None of them were tortured." He explained that he tricked his victims into handcuffing themselves. He would go on to tell them that the trick of it was to have the key. As for the murder of Rob Piest, he said he put the cord around his neck and twisted it twice. The phone rang and Gacy left the room to answer it. Piest was still standing when Gacy left. When Gacy returned, Piest was on the floor. He had gone into convulsions. He urinated in his pants. Gacy picked up his body and placed it on the bed. Gacy. At that time, I felt he was dead. 11:30 p.m. Sergeant Lang came to the door. He said they would have to adjourn to another room outside the security area. Once they had all settled in the new room, Gacy made an announcement. He would only be able to speak for 15 minutes. That's when everything took a turn for the bizarre. Hockmeister, we haven't pressured you, have we, John? Gacy, no, everything I've said has been voluntary. Gacy went on to introduce the officers to a man named Jack. Jack was one of his other personalities. Jack hated homosexuality. Schultz suspected Gacy was about to take a stab at building an insanity defense. He changed the subject. Schultz, but why death? Gacy, because the boys sold their bodies for $20. They killed themselves. Schultz, how could they strangle themselves? Gacy, because of what they did. They put the cords around their necks. They killed themselves. Schultz, but why didn't you bury them all under the house? You had a great plan. Nobody would ever find you out. Gacy, because of my heart condition, I couldn't dig a grave anymore. Besides, the crawl space is full. The interview ended at 11:45 p.m. 3:30 a.m. John Wayne Gacy decided to give an official statement to police regarding his crimes. Flanked by his two attorneys, he told his gruesome tale. He said it started in 1974. Since that year, he had murdered 25 to 30 young men. They were all gay or bisexual. They were all hustlers. They accompanied him to his house of their own volition. They were all killed at his house. He had lost count of how many of them were buried in the crawl space. The last 5 of his victims were dumped in the Des Plaines River, southwest of Chicago. All of them except one were strangled with a tourniquet around their necks. He occasionally had doubles, that is, nights when he killed 2 victims. Some of them would convulse for as long as an hour after he applied his so-called rope trick. The victims that were placed in the crawl space would either be doused with acid or he would put lime on them and bury them a foot deep in the soil. He occasionally buried one body atop another. He would throw their belongings out with the garbage. Other victims. As for Rob Piest, Gacy strangled him and slept next to his corpse all night. He got up at 6 a.m. and moved it to the attic. Gacy met a man named Joe from Elmwood Park. Joe was into bondage and sadism. Gacy only wanted oral sex. Joe was transported to the river in Gacy's trunk. Another victim pulled a knife on Gacy. He took the money from his wallet. He told Gacy he wasn't done with him sexually. This infuriated Gacy. After showing him some magic tricks, he strangled him with a rope. He buried him in the crawl space. Gacy claimed that he stabbed his first victim. He was still married at the time, but his wife was away. The men had sex and went to sleep afterwards. When Gacy woke, the man came at him with a knife. Gacy was stabbed in his right forearm. They engaged in a scuffle that resulted in Gacy taking the knife from him. Gacy stabbed him to death and buried him in the crawl space. Gacy killed a drag queen. The drag queen danced for him. Gacy said of him, he was real weird. God didn't put people on earth to do that. Gacy read a Bible verse to him. Yea, Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. From there, he twisted a length of rope around the man's neck. The third constriction was the one that did him in. Gacy brought 2 young men to his house one night. He informed one of them that he would tighten a rope around his neck 3 times. He explained that this was what he needed to do to achieve an erection. Gacy would follow up by performing fellatio on him. Gacy twisted the rope around his neck until the boy died. He went to the other room to inform the boy's friend that his friend was dead. The boy didn't believe this. Gacy handcuffed him and brought him to the other room. He strangled him near the body of his friend until he joined his companion in death. Gacy talked about his cruising for hustlers. He said he didn't always have sex with the men. In some cases, they undressed and just talked. Many of them had tales of woe to tell. Gacy would let them go. He would give them money, despite the fact that a sexual encounter had not transpired. He said that he usually restricted the sexual transactions to fellatio. He was adamant that he was not a homosexual. He said he was intensely afraid of the possibility that he might be one. He didn't like gay men and did not enjoy cruising at the bars they frequented. Referring to homosexuality in general, he said, "A man is a man, and if he didn't like girls, there was something wrong with him." He had no interest in BDSM and considered people who engaged in it to be weirdos. He said he hated being propositioned. He claimed to have once thrown a man out of his car because he offered Gacy $10 for sex. Gacy felt insulted. He preferred to be the dominant one and insisted upon being the one doing the propositioning. Gacy felt little more than contempt for hustlers. If they were deceptive, greedy, or tried to rip him off, he would retaliate. Gacy couldn't recall the names of his other victims. He was sure he had murdered 30 men, however. The interrogating officers were skeptical about his body count. Though he would have been released for the marijuana charge, the investigators emphasized his culpability in the murders of which he was accused. The judge denied Gacy bail. A preliminary hearing was set for December 29th. Gacy's attorney, Sam Amarante, requested that John be remanded to the medical facility of a jail, as he characterized his client as a, quote, very sick individual. This request was granted, as it was obvious to everybody involved that Gacy was evil and twisted. Through further questioning, Gacy recounted the events of the evening when Rob Piest disappeared. As Gacy told it, they headed toward his house, and at one point he told Piest that he was a very liberal person, and the implication was that he was not referring to politics. Rob said he was liberal too. Gacy asked him if he were so liberal that he was open to having sexual relations with another male. Rob said he didn't think he could bring himself to do it. Gacy asked him if he would do it for a large lump sum of money. According to Gacy, Rob said he would do nearly anything for a large amount of money. Gacy made a point of telling the investigators for the umpteenth time that he was bisexual and never forced sex on anyone. Once they were at the house, John demonstrated to Rob some of the magic tricks he performed as Pogo the Clown. The last trick to be performed involved the handcuffs. Realizing he wasn't able to free himself of the cuffs, Rob became distressed. Still, he didn't try to stop Gacy from removing his trousers. John tried to perform oral sex on Rob. Not only was Rob not aroused, but he began to cry. Gacy told Piest he had one more trick to show him. The rope trick. After strangling Piest to death with the tourniquet, he put Rob's remains into his bed and slept next to his corpse. Albrecht asked Gacy if he sodomized Rob's corpse. John said, "I didn't, but Jack might have. Albrecht said, "Did Jack usually have anal sex with his victims?" Gacy nodded. He said he was unable to get an erection by any other means. Albrecht asked Gacy how he managed to get the ropes around the victims' necks. John said he didn't have to. They were so fascinated to see the trick demonstrated that they were more than willing to adorn the ropes themselves. Gacy described the story of his first murder. It was in 1974. He met the young man in Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal. The man's intention was to cruise the city looking for women. Gacy escorted him as he went about his search. Lady luck was not on the man's side. Following this, Gacy tried to ascertain if the man was bisexual. He asked him if there is more than one way to have sex. The man said that 2 males can do it. Gacy acted as if he were green enough to find this concept exotic. The young man told him that girls and guys can give blowjobs and that it was all the same. They went to Gacy's house, where they had sex. Gacy killed him in the morning. He buried him in the crawl space and poured concrete over him. Eugenia Godzik heard about all the bodies of young men that had been exhumed. Concerned that her brother Gregory might have been among them, she reported this concern to the authorities. They advised her to contact Gregory's dentist. Gregory had had dental work shortly before his disappearance, so this evidence would be helpful to the investigation. Christmas Eve, 1978. John Wayne Gacy wrote a letter to his family. Gacy, Dear Mom and Family, 1978. Please forgive me for what I'm about to tell you. I have been very sick for a long time, both mentally and physically. I wish I had had help sooner. May God forgive me. As police dug up more bones from Gacy's crawl space, they found that some of the pelvic cavities contained items like pill bottles and wadded-up cloths, which had apparently been shoved up the victims' anuses. The environment was so filthy that anybody who was lacerated had to go to a hospital for a tetanus shot. They were encouraged to shave at night to avoid exposing open wounds to the environment and being infected. The only relief came in the form of the methane and hydrogen sulfide that emitted from the bodies. They dulled their sense of smell and soothed churning stomachs. When one of the bodies was dug up, it bloated with gas so rapidly and to such a large size. Dr. Stein made an incision to release the pressure. Gacy was transferred to Cermak Hospital in the Cook County Jail. He was angry about the way he was portrayed in the media. He asserted that the coverage was distorted and marked by falsehood. In a letter to his friend Ron Rode, he said, "My life is like being in a dark tunnel, not knowing how long it is, or even if I am going in the right direction." In another letter he wrote, "Since the dark shadow of Satan has come over me, it seems that my fair-weather friends have run away. When things were good and I was giving, everyone was on my bandwagon. But as soon as I am accused and suspected, they run and hide. May God have mercy on them. If it wasn't for God's will, I would have never given or helped so many people. Oh, I am no saint or anything like that, just one of God's children. I do not take the right to sin in judgment on others or myself." Trial. John Wayne Gacy's case went to trial on February 6, 1980. He was charged with 33 murders. On February 18th, Dr. Robert Stein testified that all the bodies found at Gacy's property were, quote, markedly decomposed and putrefied skeletonized remains, end quote. He said that out of all the autopsies, 13 of the victims died of asphyxiation, 6 of ligature strangulation, 1 of multiple stab wounds to the chest, and 10 in ways that were undetermined. Gacy's defense team asserted that all the 33 deaths were caused by accidental erotic asphyxia. Stein dismissed this possibility, saying it was highly improbable. February 21st. Surviving victim Jeffrey Rignall testified on behalf of the prosecution. He broke down and cried several times while describing the torture to which Gacy subjected him in March 1978. He was asked if he felt Gacy appreciated the criminality of his actions. Rignall said his belief was that Gacy was unable to because of the, quote, beastly and animalistic ways he attacked me, end quote. While he was cross-examined, he vomited from the distress he experienced in the retelling. He was dismissed from further testimony. February 29th. Donald Voorhees, who was raped by Gacy in 1967, testified about his ordeal. He mentioned the occasion when Gacy hired another youth to assault him into refraining from reporting the sexual assault to police. Voorhees testified for a brief time, but was unable to do so for long due to his distress in the retelling, so he was asked to step down. Robert Donnelly testified about his experience with Gacy in December 1977. As he described the ordeal, he broke down crying several times. Gacy laughed as he did so. Nevertheless, Donnelly got through it. One of Gacy's attorneys tried to discredit him, but Donnelly's testimony was factually consistent throughout. During the 5th week of the trial, Gacy wrote a personal letter to Judge Garipo. He requested a mistrial for several reasons. He said he did not approve of his representation's insanity plea. He said his lawyers didn't allow him to take the witness stand, which he wanted to do. He felt his defense hadn't called enough medical witnesses. He said the police lied about statements he made to detectives following his arrest. He characterized their statements as self-serving. The judge responded to the letter, saying that both of his attorneys had not been denied the opportunity or funds to summon expert witnesses to testify. He also pointed out that he was entitled under law to testify. He could have chosen to take the stand, as was his right. This is a complete list of the known victims and confirmed information regarding their murders. Name: Timothy Jack McCoy, age 16. Date of murder: January 3rd, 1972. Recovery number: body 9. Location removed. Crawl space. John Butkovich, 18. July 31st, 1975. Body number 2. Garage. Daryl Julius Sampson, 18. April 6, 1976. Body number 29. Dining room. Randall Wayne Reffitt, 15. May 14, 1976. Body number 7. Crawl space. Samuel G. Dodd Stapleton, 14. May 14, 1976. Body number 6. Crawl space. Michael Bonin, 17. June 3rd, 1976. Body 18. Crawl space. William Huey Carroll Jr., 16. June 13th, 1976. Body 22. Crawl space. James Byron Hankinson, 16. August 5th, 1976. Body number 24. Crawl space. Rick Louis Johnston, 17. August 6, 1976. Body number 23. Crawl space. Kenneth Ray Parker, 16. October 24th, 1976. Body number 15. Crawl space. Michael M. Marino, age 14. Date of murder: October 24th, 1976. Recovery number: body 14. Crawl space. William George Bundy, 19. October 26, 1976. Body number 19. Crawl space. Francis Wayne Alexander, 21. Circa December 1st, 1976. Body 5. Crawl space. Gregory John Godzik, 17. December 12th, 1976. Body number 4. Crawl space. John Alec Civic, 19. January 20th, 1977. Body number 3. Crawl space. John Stephen Prestige, 20. March 15th, 1977. Body 1. Crawl space. Matthew Walter Bowman, 19. July 5th, 1977. Body number 8. Crawl space. Robert Edward Gilroy Jr., 18. September 15th, 1977. Body number 25. Crawl space. John Anthony Mowry, 19. September 25th, 1977. Body number 20. Crawl space. Russell Lloyd Nelson, 21. October 17th, 1977. Body 16. Crawl space. Robert David Winch, 16. November 10th, 1977. Body 11. Crawl space. Tommy Joe Bowling, 20. November 18th, 1977. Body number 12. Crawl space. David Paul Talsma, 19. December 9th, 1977. Body number 17. Crawl space. William Wayne Kindred, 19. February 16th, 1978. Body 27. Crawl space. Timothy David O'Rourke, 20. June 16th to the 23rd, 1978. Body 31. DePlain River. Frank William Blandigan, 19. November 4th, 1978. Body number 32. DePlain River. James Mazzara, 20. November 24th, 1978. Body 33. DePlain River. Robert Jerome Piest, 15. December 11th, 1978. Body number 30. DePlain River. In his closing arguments, prosecuting attorney William Kunkel asked the jury not to show sympathy, but to show justice. He asked them to, quote, show the same sympathy this man showed when he took these lives and put them there. By there, he was referring to the crawl space. The jury deliberated for under 2 hours. They found Gacy guilty of 33 charges of murder. He was also found guilty of sexual assault and taking indecent liberties with a child. The two latter convictions referred to the attack on Robert Piest. At the time, this was the highest number of murders for which a single person was convicted in the history of the United States. During the sentencing phase of the trial, the jury took less than 2 hours to sentence Gacy to death for every murder. His execution date was scheduled for June 2nd, 1980, though due to appeals and other holdups, it did not occur until May 9th, 1994. During his time on death row, Gacy painted to pass the time. The subjects depicted in his paintings were diverse, with Christ, birds, skulls, clowns, including himself as Pogo or Patches, his house, and John Dillinger. He painted a series he called Hi Ho, which featured scenes from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He was allowed to earn money from the paintings, and did, though he insisted he painted, quote, to bring joy into people's lives. For Gacy's last meal before being executed, he was allowed to have a private picnic on the prison grounds with relatives. For his last meal, he chose a bucket of KFC, a dozen fried shrimp, French fries, fresh strawberries, and a Diet Coke. After receiving last rites from a Catholic priest, John Wayne Gacy was executed via lethal injection. A crowd of 1,000 assembled outside of the prison. A few of the congregants were anti-death penalty advocates, but most were more than in favor of putting an end to the life of the killer clown. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.